My husband's mom nearly killed my daughter to prove my parenting was wrong. I threw her out immediately. A year later, she walked into my daughter's school and tried to have her taken away behind my back. The first time my mother-in-law almost killed my daughter. Everyone told me it was an accident. The second time, I realized it never had been. My husband, Daniel, and I had been married for 7 years. Our daughter, Lily, was 4. She was bright, curious, funny, and she had one serious medical condition: a severe peanut allergy. Not the kind that caused a mild rash. The kind that could close her airway in minutes. We carried 2 Apapens everywhere. Every babysitter knew the emergency plan. Her preschool had medical forms posted in 3 different locations. Birthday parties required advance phone calls. Family dinners required ingredient lists. Living with Lily's allergy wasn't difficult anymore. It was simply our normal. Everyone in our family understood how serious it was. Everyone, except Daniel's mother, Carol. Carol believed modern parents exaggerated everything. According to her, children today were too protected. She insisted allergies were mostly psychological. She constantly repeated stories about how nobody worried about peanuts when Daniel was growing up. Every visit included unsolicited parenting advice. She criticized our bedtime routine, our screen time limits, our food choices. She even complained that Lily said "please" too often because, apparently, polite children grew into weak adults. Most of her comments were annoying. Then they became dangerous. One afternoon, Carol watched Lily refuse a peanut butter cookie at a family gathering. Instead of accepting the answer, Carol laughed. She loudly announced that children copied whatever fears their parents taught them. I calmly explained, once again, that this wasn't fear. It was a medically documented allergy, confirmed by multiple specialists. Carol rolled her eyes. She muttered that doctors diagnosed everything these days. Daniel corrected her immediately. He reminded her that he'd personally watched Lily go into anaphylactic shock at 18 months old. Carol apologized. Or at least, she appeared to. Looking back, I think she was only apologizing because everyone else was watching. Several weeks later, she offered to babysit. Daniel and I hadn't had a date night in months. Carol insisted she wanted more time with her granddaughter. I hesitated. Something about her attitude toward Lily's allergy always made me uncomfortable. Daniel promised he'd review every safety rule again before we left. He did. He showed her the Apapens. Emergency numbers. The allergy action plan taped inside the kitchen cabinet. The foods Lily could safely eat. Carol smiled patiently through the entire explanation. She even repeated everything back perfectly. We finally agreed. 3 hours later, my phone rang. It wasn't Carol. It was a paramedic. They asked whether I was Lily's mother. I don't remember the drive to the hospital. I only remember running through the emergency entrance and seeing my little girl connected to monitors. Her face was swollen. Her breathing sounded strained. Daniel stood beside the bed looking completely broken. Carol was sitting quietly in the corner. When I asked what happened, she answered before anyone else could. She claimed Lily had somehow grabbed the wrong cookie while she wasn't looking. Something felt wrong immediately. The cookies we'd left in the house were allergy safe. There weren't any peanut products in our kitchen, not one. The emergency physician eventually entered the room carrying a plastic food container. He asked whether it belonged to anyone. Carol quietly admitted it was hers. She had baked homemade peanut butter cookies before coming over. My heart stopped. We had specifically told her never to bring peanut products into our home. She shrugged. Then she said the sentence I'll never forget. She admitted she had wanted to prove Lily wasn't actually allergic. And she believed that if Lily ate a small amount, everyone would finally realize we'd been overreacting. And she genuinely thought she was helping. Nth room went completely silent. And even the nurse froze. Nth the doctor stared at Carol as though he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. And Daniel looked physically sick. And our daughter had almost died. And because his mother wanted to win an argument. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He simply pointed toward the hospital room door. Nth and I calmly told Carol to leave. Immediately. He actually looked offended. He insisted everyone was overreacting because Lily was alive. Nish claimed the doctors had only frightened us unnecessarily. Hospital security ended the conversation for her. Nth they escorted her out before I had the chance to say another word. Net that night. And Daniel made a decision I never thought he'd have the strength to make. He called his mother. He told her she would never again be alone with our daughter. Not next week. Not next year. Not ever. Nen. Carol laughed. Nen said we'd calm down eventually. Nen she was convinced grandparents always get forgiven. Nen she had no idea. And that was only the beginning. And for the first few weeks, we thought the nightmare was over. And we blocked Carol's number. And changed the locks on our house. And removed her emergency contact privileges from Lily's preschool. Ne even emailed every teacher explaining that Carol was no longer authorized to pick Lily up under any circumstances. And the school took it seriously. And they required identification from every approved adult. Ne finally started sleeping again. At least Ne thought I did. Ne about 2 months later, little things started happening. A package would appear on our porch with no return address. 9 side were expensive toys for Lily. No note. No explanation. Only gifts. And we donated every single one. Then birthday cards started arriving. And again, no return address. Inside were handwritten messages pretending nothing had happened. Carol never apologized. She never mentioned the hospital. She simply wrote about how much she missed her granddaughter and hoped we'd stop punishing the family. Straight into the trash they went. Then neighbors started mentioning they'd seen an older woman parked across the street, always in the same silver SUV, always during the hour Lily played outside after preschool. One neighbor even assumed she was a private investigator. I knew exactly who it was. Daniel drove around the neighborhood one afternoon and found Carol's SUV parked 2 streets away. She wasn't reading. She wasn't on her phone. She was watching our house through binoculars. When Daniel confronted her, she claimed she had every right to look at public property. The police couldn't do much because she technically hadn't broken the law. But they documented the incident. That report would become important later. Months passed. Instead of backing off, Carol became more creative. She began contacting relatives we'd barely spoken to in years. According to her version of events, we had become unstable parents. She claimed we'd manipulated doctors into inventing Lily's allergy. She insisted we were emotionally abusing our daughter by convincing her ordinary food could kill her. Some relatives believed her. Most didn't. Then Child Protective Services knocked on our front door. Someone had anonymously reported that we intentionally starved Lily, refused her medical care, and isolated her from extended family. The social worker spent nearly 3 hours with us. She inspected our home, reviewed Lily's medical records, spoke with Lily's pediatrician, interviewed her preschool teachers. By the end of the visit, she quietly apologized. She admitted the allegations appeared intentionally false. The case was closed within a week. But before leaving, she offered one piece of advice. She told us to keep detailed records, because false reports often escalate. And we took that seriously. Every text, every voicemail, every unexpected appearance, every witness, everything went into a folder. Daniel called it our insurance policy. And he prayed we'd never need it. Nescus months after the hospital incident, Lily started kindergarten. Neshe loved school immediately. Neshe adored her teacher. Ne made friends within days. And for the first time since everything happened, life almost felt normal again. And then one afternoon, Lily came home unusually quiet. And during bedtime she casually mentioned seeing Grandma Carol outside the school fence. And my heart stopped. And I asked whether Carol had spoken to her. And Lily shook her head. Na she said Grandma smiled and waved. And then pointed toward the parking lot. And thankfully, Lily remembered our safety rule. Never leave school grounds unless a teacher says it's okay. She ignored the wave and walked back toward her classroom. And the teacher later confirmed she'd noticed an unfamiliar woman watching dismissal and had immediately alerted the office. By the time staff went outside, and Carol had already driven away. The school reviewed security footage. There was no doubt. It was her. The principal called us that evening. Without hesitation, the school updated Lily's file. Carol's photograph was added to the list of prohibited individuals. Every staff member received a copy. Daniel thought that would finally stop her. He was wrong. And because people like Carol don't believe rules apply to them. They only see obstacles. And if one door closes, and they simply look for another one. And almost exactly 1 year after Lily's hospitalization, That new door appeared. It happened on a rainy Tuesday morning. I was halfway through a work meeting when my phone rang 6 times in less than 2 minutes. The calls all came from Lily's elementary school. The moment I answered, I knew something was terribly wrong. The principal's voice was shaking. She asked me to come to the school immediately. Then she said 7 words that made my blood run cold. Your mother-in-law is here demanding your daughter. I dropped everything and ran. I don't remember driving to the school. I only remember every terrible possibility racing through my mind. Had Carol somehow taken Lily? Had she convinced someone she was authorized to pick her up? Had the school made a mistake? When I pulled into the parking lot, I immediately saw 2 police cars. My heart nearly stopped. Daniel arrived only seconds after I did. We ran inside together. The receptionist looked relieved the moment she saw us. She quickly escorted us into the principal's office. Carol was sitting there with her arms folded, looking completely calm, as if she belonged there, as if she hadn't nearly killed our daughter a year earlier. The principal quietly asked us to remain calm. Then she explained what had happened. About 30 minutes before dismissal, Carol had walked into the office carrying a thick folder. She claimed Lily was being emotionally abused by her parents. She said we had isolated Lily from her real family. Then she produced what appeared to be legal paperwork, claiming she was seeking emergency guardianship. She demanded the school release Lily directly into her custody. Thankfully, the principal refused. School policy required direct confirmation from the parents before any custody change could be recognized. Carol became increasingly aggressive. She insisted the school would be legally responsible if they allowed an abused child to remain with us. She threatened lawsuits. She claimed she had already contacted Child Protective Services. Then she demanded to speak with Lily privately. That request immediately triggered the school's emergency procedures. The principal locked down the office. Lily remained safely inside her classroom. Police were called. Listening to the story, I felt physically sick. Not because Carol had failed. Because she'd clearly planned every detail. None of the officers placed the folder she'd brought onto the conference table. 9 side were dozens of documents. And some were genuine. N printouts of old medical articles. N copies of CPS reporting guidelines. N random parenting blogs. N mixed among them were forged documents. And a fake psychologist's evaluation claiming I suffered from Munchausen syndrome by proxy. And a fabricated pediatric report stating Lily had never tested positive for peanut allergies. An unsigned statement, supposedly written by Daniel, saying he feared for our daughter's safety. And every single page was fake. Some contained spelling errors. And others listed doctors who didn't even exist. None form used the logo of a hospital that had changed its branding 3 years earlier. The detective flipped through the paperwork silently. And then he asked Carol one question. Where had she obtained these documents? Carol proudly replied that she'd spent months gathering evidence. She genuinely believed she was rescuing Lily. The detective asked another question. Did she personally create any of these reports? Without realizing the trap, she answered yes. The room became silent. He calmly explained that creating forged medical documents and presenting them to a school while attempting to obtain custody of a child was a criminal offense. And for the first time all afternoon, Carol looked nervous. She insisted they weren't forgeries. She claimed she'd merely recreated the reports because the originals had been hidden from her. That explanation only made things worse. None officer quietly handcuffed her. She looked directly at Daniel. She expected him to stop it. Instead, he stepped in front of me. Not to protect his mother. To protect me from having to look at her. As officers escorted Carol through the front office, several parents waiting to collect their children watched in stunned silence. Carol continued insisting everyone had been manipulated. She accused the principal of participating in child abuse. She accused the police of corruption. She even shouted that Lily would thank her someday. No one answered. The moment the police car drove away, I finally asked the question I'd been afraid to hear. Where's Lily? The principal smiled gently. She explained that Lily had spent the entire afternoon in the library reading books with the school counselor. She hadn't witnessed any of the confrontation. She believed there had simply been an unexpected safety drill. I burst into tears. Not because of Carol. Because my little girl had been protected from seeing the chaos. That night, the detective visited our home. He advised us that, based on everything they had uncovered, the district attorney was considering multiple charges: attempted custodial interference, forgery, presenting false documents, harassment, and possibly child endangerment. Then he asked whether this was truly the first time Carol had ignored medical advice regarding Lily. I quietly walked into my office, returned with the thick binder we'd been building for an entire year. Inside was everything: hospital records from the peanut incident, photographs, police reports, witness statements, false CPS complaints, videos from neighbors showing Carol watching our house, copies of threatening emails, every unwanted package, every violation. The detective stared at the binder for several seconds. Then he slowly looked up at us. He said something I'll never forget. This wasn't a grandmother making bad decisions. This was a campaign. And for the first time since Lily was 4 years old, someone in authority finally saw Carol exactly the way we had. The criminal case moved much faster than I expected. Apparently, walking into an elementary school with forged custody documents tends to get a prosecutor's attention. Within 2 weeks, Carol was formally charged. The district attorney assigned to the case later explained that the school incident wasn't being viewed as one isolated event. They were looking at the entire pattern: the peanut exposure, the false CPS reports, the stalking, the forged medical records, the attempted removal of Lily from school. Each incident by itself might have resulted in a warning or a misdemeanor. Together, they painted the picture of someone becoming increasingly obsessed. Our attorney immediately requested a permanent protective order. The judge granted a temporary one the same afternoon. Carol was prohibited from contacting us directly. She couldn't come near our home. She couldn't approach Lily's school. She couldn't contact teachers, doctors, babysitters, neighbors, or even extended family on our behalf. For the first time in over a year, we felt like someone was finally taking us seriously. Unfortunately, Carol wasn't finished. About a month before the criminal trial, Daniel received a voicemail from his father. His parents had been married for over 40 years. Frank rarely disagreed with Carol publicly. He usually stayed quiet. This time, his voice sounded exhausted. He asked if we would meet him alone, without Carol. Against my better judgment, we agreed. We met him at a quiet diner halfway across town. He looked older than I remembered. His hands shook as he stirred his coffee. For several minutes he said nothing. Then he quietly admitted he'd known Carol had become increasingly fixated on Lily. He confessed that after the hospital incident, she'd spent hours every day researching conspiracy websites, claiming food allergies were fabricated by pharmaceutical companies. She filled notebooks with articles, highlighted passages, printed internet comments from strangers who claimed they had cured allergies through exposure. At first, Frank assumed it was simply another one of Carol's strange hobbies. Then he discovered she'd started collecting our schedules. She knew what time Lily left for school, what days Daniel worked from home, which grocery store I visited, which gymnastics class Lily attended. Frank confronted her. She insisted she was only preparing for the day we'd come to our senses. Instead, she began hiding the notebooks. He admitted something that chilled me. Several months before the school incident, he'd caught Carol practicing Daniel's signature on scrap paper. When he asked why, she laughed and claimed she was bored. At the time, he believed her. Now he understood exactly what she'd been preparing for. He reached into his briefcase, placed 3 spiral notebooks on the table. They belonged to Carol. Inside were months of handwritten plans, not fantasies. Plans. Lists of school dismissal times, maps of nearby streets, names of teachers, phone numbers. Notes about which staff members looked easier to manipulate. One page simply read, "If the school believes her parents are unstable, they'll have to release her eventually." I felt physically ill. Frank quietly slid the notebooks toward us. He said he'd already given copies to the detective. Then he apologized. Not for Carol. For himself. He admitted he'd spent years minimizing her behavior because confronting her always caused another argument. Every time she crossed a line, he'd convinced himself it wasn't serious enough to intervene. Until now. He looked directly at Daniel. Then said the sentence that clearly haunted him. "I should have stopped her long before your daughter ended up in a hospital." Daniel didn't blame him. But neither of us could honestly tell him he was wrong. Those notebooks became devastating evidence. During pretrial hearings, Carol's attorney tried arguing she had simply been a worried grandmother acting emotionally. The prosecutor introduced the notebooks, then the forged documents, then security footage from the school, then hospital records from the peanut incident. Finally, the detective played Carol's own recorded interview. In it, she proudly admitted creating replacement medical reports because she believed the real doctors were lying. Her own words destroyed the insanity defense her attorney had quietly begun exploring. The judge ordered a full psychiatric evaluation anyway. The report surprised everyone. Carol wasn't found legally insane. She understood exactly what she was doing. The psychologist concluded something else instead. Carol possessed an overwhelming need to control every situation around her. Whenever reality contradicted her beliefs, she didn't change her beliefs. She changed the facts. If medical records disagreed with her, she created new ones. If custody laws prevented access to Lily, she invented legal authority. If family members disagreed, she convinced herself they had been manipulated. Reading that report finally explained years of behavior we'd never understood. But it didn't excuse any of it. The trial was scheduled for early spring. And before it even began, Carol's own defense attorney privately approached the prosecutor. He wanted to discuss a plea agreement. For the first time since all of this had started, even the people representing Carol knew the evidence against her was overwhelming. The prosecutor rejected the first plea deal almost immediately. Carol had offered to plead guilty to a single misdemeanor. In exchange, she wanted probation and supervised visitation with Lily once she completed counseling. When our attorney told us the details, I honestly thought he was joking. Supervised visitation? After everything? After the hospital. After stalking our house. After forging medical documents. After trying to remove our daughter from school. She still believed she deserved access to Lily. The prosecutor's response was blunt. There would be no agreement that involved contact with our daughter. None. The trial began 3 weeks later. Carol entered the courtroom dressed like the perfect grandmother. Nen small pastel sweater. Nen small cross necklace. Nen reading glasses. Nen she smiled at the jury, as though she had wandered into the wrong courtroom by mistake. If I hadn't lived through the last 2 years, I might have believed the act myself. Nen the prosecution didn't waste time. Instead of beginning with legal arguments, they started with photographs. Nilili. In the pediatric intensive care unit. Nen the breathing tube. Nen the swollen face. Nen the EPI pens. Nen the oxygen monitor. Nen the courtroom became completely silent. The emergency physician testified first. He explained exactly how close Lily had come to dying. He stated that without rapid treatment, the outcome could have been very different. Then he dropped the sentence that seemed to freeze the jury. The amount of peanut exposure wasn't accidental. Someone had intentionally given Lily enough peanut butter to test whether the allergy was real. There was no medical reason to do that. Only personal belief. Next came Lily's allergist. She brought years of medical records. Blood tests. Skin tests. Hospital admissions. Every document confirmed the same diagnosis. Severe life-threatening peanut allergy. Defense attempted to argue that allergies can improve over time. Allergist calmly agreed. She explained that improvement is determined through controlled hospital testing, not by secretly feeding a 4-year-old peanuts inside her own home. Even several jurors visibly shook their heads. The prosecutor then introduced the forged documents from the school incident. A forensic document examiner testified that multiple signatures had been copied by tracing authentic examples. Printer analysis linked every page to the same home printer found in Carol's office. Computer records showed the files had been created on her laptop. The evidence was overwhelming. Then Frank took the stand. I wasn't prepared for how difficult that would be. He looked at Carol only once. Then he kept his eyes on the prosecutor. He admitted that the notebooks belonged to his wife. He confirmed finding her practicing Daniel's signature months before the school incident. He described discovering maps, schedules, and handwritten plans. Several times he had to stop speaking because his voice broke. At one point, the prosecutor asked why he finally came forward. Frank looked toward us. Then toward Lily, who wasn't present but whose photograph had been shown earlier. He quietly answered that he realized protecting his wife had turned him into someone who wasn't protecting his granddaughter. That single sentence stayed with me, because it was true. Silence can become its own form of permission. Then it was Daniel's turn. I'd never seen my husband so composed. He didn't yell. He didn't insult his mother. He simply described what had happened. He explained how many times they had warned Carol about the allergy. How she had repeated the emergency instructions back to them. How she had promised she understood. Then he described receiving the phone call from the paramedics. His voice finally cracked when he admitted he'd thought his daughter was dying because he'd trusted the wrong person. Several jurors wiped away tears. The defense chose not to cross-examine him for long. There wasn't much left to challenge. Finally, it was Carol's turn. Against her attorney's advice, she insisted on testifying. Within 10 minutes, everything fell apart. She admitted she still believed Lily's allergy had been exaggerated. She insisted the hospital had overreacted. She claimed the forged documents were necessary because real doctors refused to listen. Then she made the biggest mistake of the entire trial. She looked directly at the jury and said she would make the same decisions again if it meant saving Lily from what she called bad parenting. The courtroom went completely still. Even her own attorney closed his eyes for a moment. Because in one sentence, Carol had admitted she wasn't sorry, she wasn't remorseful, she wasn't misunderstood. She remained convinced she was right. The prosecutor didn't ask another question. He didn't need to. Carol had just destroyed the last remaining chance of convincing anyone she deserved leniency. As we left the courthouse that afternoon, our attorney quietly leaned over and whispered something. I've tried cases for 25 years. I've never seen a defendant convict herself so completely. For the first time since Lily almost died, I allowed myself to believe this nightmare was finally approaching its end. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Considering they had listened to nearly 3 weeks of testimony, that was astonishingly fast. When everyone was called back into the courtroom, I held Daniel's hand so tightly that neither of us could feel our fingers anymore. Carol walked in with the same confident expression she'd worn since the trial began. She genuinely believed she had been misunderstood. The courtroom clerk stood. The foreperson handed over the verdict, one by one. Guilty. Attempted custodial interference. Guilty. Presenting false records. Guilty. Presenting false records to obtain custody of a minor. Guilty. Harassment. Guilty. Reckless child endangerment related to the peanut exposure. The courtroom was silent. Carol didn't cry. She looked confused, as if she couldn't understand how everyone else had reached the wrong conclusion. The judge scheduled sentencing for the following month. Before dismissing everyone, he looked directly at Carol. He said something none of us would ever forget. He explained that grandparents are given extraordinary trust. Society assumes they love grandchildren enough to protect them. Carol hadn't merely broken the law, she had betrayed one of the deepest forms of trust a child can have. That betrayal made her actions especially serious. At sentencing, dozens of letters were submitted. Teachers, doctors, neighbors, the principal, even the paramedic who had answered the emergency call wrote about the lasting impact of the case. Then the judge invited Daniel to give a victim impact statement. He stood quietly. No dramatic performance, no shouting. He simply described the first time Lily asked whether Grandma still wanted her to die. The courtroom froze. None of us had ever told anyone that. About 6 months after the hospital incident, Lily had asked that question while we were driving home from school. She genuinely couldn't understand why someone who claimed to love her had intentionally given her something that made it impossible to breathe. There is no parenting book that teaches you how to answer a question like that. Daniel admitted he still didn't know if he had answered it correctly. Several jurors from the trial lowered their heads. Even the court reporter paused for a moment. When it was my turn, I didn't talk about hospital bills, or legal fees, or sleepless nights. I talked about trust. How every school drop-off had become terrifying. How every unknown phone call made my heart race. How our daughter had started asking teachers whether every snack was really safe. Carol hadn't only endangered Lily physically. She had stolen the sense of safety every child deserves. The judge agreed. He sentenced Carol to several years in state prison, followed by a lengthy period of supervised release. More importantly, He signed a permanent no-contact order. Carol could never contact Lily again. No letters, no gifts, no phone calls, no third-party messages, nothing. As deputies escorted her away, she finally looked at Daniel. She waited for him to stop them, to change his mind, to rescue her one last time. He didn't move. Neither did I. Some consequences arrive too late to prevent the damage. But they're still necessary. Life slowly became quiet again. The first few months felt strange. Every unexpected knock on the door still made me nervous. Every unfamiliar car outside our house caught my attention. Trauma doesn't disappear because a judge signs an order. It fades one ordinary day at a time. Lily began seeing a child therapist. At first, she drew pictures of hospitals, police cars, locked classroom doors. Over time, the drawings changed. Flowers, dogs, rainbows, her friends. Eventually, one afternoon, she drew our family standing in front of our house. There was one detail that made me cry. She drew herself smiling with both hands empty. For years, every picture she'd made included a pipe clutched tightly in one hand. Her therapist later told us that children often reveal healing through tiny details adults overlook. That drawing became my favorite piece of art. Frank divorced Carol about a year after the trial. He later admitted he should have left much sooner. Not because he stopped loving her, because loving someone doesn't require helping them hurt other people. He remained part of Lily's life. Slowly, carefully. He never asked us to forget the past. He simply showed up consistently. School plays, birthday parties, dance recitals, always respecting every boundary. Trust wasn't rebuilt through promises. It was rebuilt through years of quiet actions. 5 years later, Lily's elementary school invited me to speak during a parent safety seminar. The principal wanted parents to understand why emergency contact lists and custody procedures mattered so much. After the presentation, a young mother approached me. She had tears in her eyes. She quietly admitted she'd been ignoring repeated boundary violations from one of her own relatives because she didn't want family conflict. Then she said something that reminded me why sharing our story mattered. She told me she finally understood that protecting a child's feelings sometimes means hurting an adult's. She thanked me. I hugged her. Because years earlier, I had desperately needed someone to tell me the same thing. Today, Lily is a happy teenager. She still carries an aita. She probably always will. But it no longer defines her. She plays soccer, gets good grades, rolls her eyes whenever Daniel tells one of his terrible dad jokes. She's exactly what every parent hopes their child will become. Safe, confident, free to grow without constantly looking over her shoulder. People occasionally ask whether I regret cutting Carol out of our lives after the hospital incident. My answer has never changed. Absolutely not. Being a grandparent is not a right. It's a privilege built on trust. The moment someone deliberately risks a child's life to prove themselves right, they don't lose access because the parents are cruel. They lose access because they've proven they cannot be trusted with the one thing that matters most. Looking back, this story was never really about a peanut allergy. It was about control. Carol believed love meant always knowing better than everyone else. She believed being older automatically made her right. She confused authority with wisdom. Real love does the opposite. Real love listens, learns, admits mistakes, protects the vulnerable, even when it means admitting you were wrong. The greatest victory wasn't the guilty verdict. It wasn't the prison sentence. It wasn't even the permanent restraining order. The greatest victory happened years later, when Lily came home from school one afternoon and casually asked if her friends could come over for pizza. She didn't mention hospitals. She didn't ask whether someone unsafe might show up. She didn't check every window before opening the front door. She was just a normal kid thinking about a normal afternoon. After everything we'd been through, that ordinary moment felt extraordinary. Because in the end, we didn't just protect our daughter from one dangerous person. We gave her something far more valuable. The chance to grow up believing that the adults who truly loved her would always choose her safety over their pride. And that's exactly what every child deserves.